My name is Martha Green, and I'm a widow from a steel town outside Pittsburgh. I wasn't looking for a fight when I walked into courtroom 3B that morning. I wanted a fair hearing and a clear line between what was mine and what others tried to claim. The hardwood benches smelled like lemon oil, jurors shuffled their coats, and I kept both hands on my purse so I wouldn't tremble. When Judge Harold Whitman looked up and saw me, the gavel stopped mid-air. His face changed, like a man who'd just walked into an old photograph, and he whispered, "It's her." The room went still enough to hear the clock tick. I didn't bow. I didn't break. I met his eyes. Doubt pressed against my ribs. Anger warmed my throat, and an old ache rose when I thought of the house my husband Thomas and I had painted twice over, the porch where violets still bloom every April. I felt every year of my age and none of its frailty. The clerk called the case. Papers slid. Someone coughed. Across the aisle, a man I once welcomed to my Sunday table stared back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I kept breathing. I was ready to tell the truth. All of it. In order. No more secrets and no more shame. The day everything shifted began with a knock that sounded like a landlord's. It was late afternoon, the hour when the light slants across the kitchen and hangs in the dust above the sink. My daughter Elaine stood on the porch with her husband, Richard, holding a casserole dish I hadn't asked for. He moved first, shouldering past the welcome mat like he'd bought the rights to our memories. "I made chicken and rice," Elaine said, trying to sound cheerful. She smelled like chalk dust and cinnamon, the way she used to when she taught third grade full-time. Richard set the dish on the counter and surveyed the room with those fast little eyes, counting outlets, counting cabinets, counting me. He talked like a real estate brochure, and a sympathy card had been stapled together. "Martha, the stairs are steep. That back step is a lawsuit waiting to happen. You deserve safety, convenience. There's a facility in Cranberry with a library, a craft room, a shuttle to the mall. You could play bingo, meet people, relax." "What about my roses?" I asked. "Do they shuttle those too?" Richard laughed like he'd missed the punchline but wanted credit for being there. Elaine touched my arm, almost a flinch. "Mom, we worry. The house is a lot. Since Dad," I set 2 plates on the table, because talking went better with food in front of us. The casserole steamed. I tasted salt and cream and effort. We ate. And for a few minutes we could pretend it was one of those ordinary nights when Thomas would come in, smelling of motor oil, kiss the top of my head, and ask who'd won Jeopardy. Richard unfolded a folder from his messenger bag. The papers were crisp, too white against the table we'd sanded down ourselves one summer. "These are options," he said. "We can get above asking if we move fast. Inventory is tight. I took the liberty of requesting a valuation." "You took the liberty," I repeated. "Just to help." He smiled. "Elaine and I can handle everything. We'll make sure your medical directives are in order, too. Power of attorney. All of it. Less for you to fuss over." The room thinned around me, like the air had been pulled through a straw. Power of attorney. My fork clicked against the plate. "I'm not moving," I said. Richard's smile tightened. "Mom," he said, borrowing a word that wasn't his. "No one's forcing anything out, but timelines matter. The market shifts, and accidents happen." Elaine's eyes slid to the window. Outside, the porch swing moved in a breeze I couldn't feel. I folded my napkin and laid it on the plate. "If we're talking timelines," I said, "we'll follow mine." He didn't like that. A small, mean light sparked behind his teeth. He closed the folder but left it on the table, like a flag planted where it didn't belong. And that was how the first line got drawn, quiet as a breath, firm as a fence post sunk in clay. 2 days later, I found the folder still sitting where Richard had left it, right in the middle of the kitchen table. The corners had curled from the damp, and the sight of it made my stomach knot. I carried it to the trash can, then stopped. Throwing it out would only make him bring another one. Better to know what game he was playing. Inside were glossy pages from a realtor, photos of my house stripped of memory, no family pictures, no clutter, just wide-angle shots of the living room that looked nothing like the place where Thomas once stretched out after his shift. A note in Richard's hand said, "Act quickly, market peaking." Beneath that, another sheet, a draft of a medical power of attorney, with a blank space waiting for my signature. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It came in layers, slow and cutting, like peeling paint. My daughter's neat handwriting appeared in the margins of one document, small reminders to be patient and let Mom ease into it. She wasn't blind. She knew what he was planning. That evening, Elaine came alone. She stood by the counter, twisting her wedding ring. "He means well," she said softly. He worries about liability, about what happens if you fall." "I've been falling and getting back up my whole life," I answered. "I don't need a manager, Elaine. I need a daughter." Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't answer. Instead, she picked up the folder and hugged it to her chest like it was a shield. "Just think about it, please." After she left, I poured myself tea and sat at the table in the dim light. Thomas's chair faced me, empty as it had been for 3 years, but I still spoke aloud. "They think I'm frail," I whispered. "They think I'll sign my life away." The house creaked in reply, as if the beams themselves remembered the hands that built them. That was when I decided silence wouldn't protect me anymore. I opened the hallway closet and dragged down the old cedar box Thomas had kept locked for decades. The key was taped beneath a drawer, exactly where he'd said once, half joking, "If I'm gone and you need it." My fingers shook, but the lock turned easily. Inside lay folders thicker than Richard's. Deeds, bank statements, certificates with embossed seals, and on top, a sealed envelope with my name written in Thomas's blocky script. I pressed it against my chest before opening it, the paper warm from my skin. His words spilled out like he'd written them yesterday. "Martha, if they ever try to take what's yours, remember this. Power is not for revenge. It's for teaching. It's for protecting what matters." The weight of those words steadied me. I wasn't alone. Thomas had left me more than memories. He had left me weapons, and I intended to use them. The letter trembled in my hands, but my resolve only grew stronger as I read it again. Beneath Thomas's words were neat stacks of documents, title deeds, stock certificates, tax records. He had been preparing for something I never saw coming. For decades, he'd worked long hours, investing in small properties while I balanced the checkbook and clipped coupons, thinking we were just scraping by. Turns out, he'd been building a wall of quiet security around me, brick by brick. I traced the embossed seal on one deed and felt a jolt of recognition. It was for the building where Elaine and Richard rented their apartment. My own daughter had no idea that the roof over her head and the floor beneath it was tied directly to me. At the very bottom of the box lay a small velvet pouch. Inside was a key stamped with the name of a bank I thought had closed years ago. I drove there the next morning, palms slick against the wheel, half afraid it would be a dead end. But the building still stood, granite and glass, with a brass plaque that read, "Riverside Trust and Savings." The teller led me to a private room. When she opened the safe deposit box, I felt as though Thomas were standing right behind me, nudging me forward. Inside was a tidy ledger, handwritten, each entry marked with his initials, every property, every stock, every bond. It was all cataloged in his steady hand. And tucked inside the back cover was another note, Find someone you trust. Don't fight alone. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel as though it were the only thing keeping me upright. The city blurred around me, but my mind was clear. I needed help. Someone who could read these documents faster than Richard could cook up schemes. Someone who wouldn't flinch when things turned ugly. That night, I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Caroline Shaw, a financial advisor who'd once been a student in Thomas's night accounting class. I remembered her graduation party. Thomas standing proud beside her like she was his own. She answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Green, it's been ages. How are you holding up?" "I've uncovered something," I said, steadying my voice. "And I think I'm going to need your expertise." There was a pause, then a firm reply. "Bring everything to my office tomorrow morning. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe. Richard thought he was moving pawns across a board, but Thomas had left me with a queen, and I was ready to play. Caroline's office sat on the third floor of an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaky stairs and a scent of fresh coffee drifting from the lobby cafe. When I walked in, she rose from behind her desk, taller than I remembered. Her gray-streaked hair pulled into a sleek bun. Her handshake was steady, her eyes sharp but kind. "Let's see what Thomas left you," she said, clearing a wide space on her desk. I laid out the folders and ledgers, the stack of deeds and certificates, the envelope with Thomas's instructions. Caroline adjusted her glasses and leaned in. The room was quiet except for the soft swish of paper and the occasional scratch of her pen. After an hour, she sat back, whistling low. "Martha, this isn't just a nest egg. It's an empire, carefully hidden. Thomas owned 5 rental properties outright, plus controlling shares in a manufacturing firm and a tidy portfolio of municipal bonds. You're in a far stronger position than anyone realizes." Her words stunned me. Empire wasn't a word I'd ever attached to our life of casseroles and coupons. Caroline flipped to another sheet. This one, her own printout. "Now here's the other side. I ran a quick check on Richard, bankruptcy filings, gambling debts, multiple credit cards maxed out. He's leveraged to the hilt. Your son-in-law is circling the drain." I felt a bitter twist in my chest. "And he wants to drag Elaine with him." Caroline's eyes softened, but her tone stayed firm. "Exactly. That's why we need to move. Protect your holdings, lock down the titles, and put safeguards in place so he can't touch a dime." I leaned forward, clutching the envelope. "He's already pushing power of attorney papers at me. Elaine knows more than she admits. How do I fight them without tearing her away completely?" "By drawing lines," Caroline replied. "You don't need to humiliate her. You just need to make sure Richard has no leverage. Once the financial trap is gone, his mask will slip. Elaine will see for herself." Her confidence steadied me. She outlined a plan, reaffirming the trust Thomas had started, recording ownership of every property, notifying tenants about updated management. She even suggested hiring a private investigator to gather more on Richard, just in case. I walked out into the sunlight, clutching a folder of fresh documents, my pulse steady for the first time in weeks. Richard thought he held all the cards, but he had no idea another hand was already in play. I set the table myself that evening, laying out the blue china Thomas had bought at an estate sale years ago. The roast chicken filled the kitchen with garlic and thyme, but the air still felt tight, like a storm waiting just outside. I wanted Elaine and Richard to sit with me as family, but in my heart I knew this dinner would not end like any Sunday we'd shared before. They arrived together. Elaine clutched a cardigan around her shoulders, even though the room was warm. Richard walked in first, eyes scanning the living room as though he were appraising the furniture, not visiting his wife's mother. "Smells good," he said, dropping into a chair without waiting to be invited. Hope you didn't wear yourself out. I manage, I replied, setting the platter down between us. Elaine gave me a small, grateful smile, but her fingers tapped nervously against her glass. We ate in uneasy silence until I spoke. You should know something. The building where you rent, the lease you signed. I looked directly at Richard. I own it. His fork clattered against the plate. What did you just say? Elaine's eyes widened. Mom, what? I found your father's records. He left everything in order, including that building. Richard's face darkened. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, I said, steady as stone. Elaine's breath hitched. I'm pregnant, she whispered suddenly, her voice breaking through the standoff. I didn't want to say it like this, but I'm scared. Mom! My heart clenched. I wanted to reach for her, but Richard slammed his fist against the table. Don't change the subject. You think owning some rundown apartments gives you the right to dictate our lives? We'll find a way around you. I stood, hands flat on the table, meeting his glare. You will not drag my daughter or my grandchild into your debts. I won't allow it. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. She turned from him to me, torn between loyalty and desperation. The silence stretched until Richard pushed back his chair, muttering curses as he stormed toward the door. Elaine stayed behind, trembling, whispering. I don't know what to believe anymore. I touched her hand, gently but firmly. Then stay long enough to see the truth for yourself. Outside, the wind rattled the porch swing. Inside, the first crack in Richard's mask had begun to show. The weeks that followed proved how far Richard was willing to go. I came home one afternoon to find a letter shoved under my door, thick with official seals. According to the document, I had supposedly granted him medical power of attorney. My signature stared back at me, shaky and uneven, but I knew every loop of my own hand, and this was a forgery. I carried the letter straight to Caroline. She examined it under the lamp, tracing the ink with her fingertip. It's a poor copy, she said grimly, but if he's bold enough to try this once, he'll try again. We need a private investigator. The investigator, a lean man named Keller, unearthed more than I imagined. Gambling slips, fake investment contracts, threats against old colleagues. Each file painted Richard not as a misguided husband, but as a man running out of time and desperate for cash. Caroline suggested a controlled option, a settlement. We offer him a lump sum, legally binding, to sever all ties. If he accepts and walks away, Elaine gets space to think. If he refuses, we'll have him cornered. I hated rewarding his deceit, but for Elaine's sake, I agreed. Richard signed the agreement in a lawyer's office, his grin wide as if victory were his. Elaine wept with relief that night, believing the worst was over. But peace lasted only days. The neighbors called to say someone had broken into Elaine's apartment. I drove over and found Richard in the middle of the living room, shouting, knocking over lamps, demanding money that wasn't his. Elaine stood frozen by the doorway, one hand on her swelling stomach. The police arrived before he could do worse. They hauled him out, cursing and spitting, the settlement papers torn in his pocket. That night, Elaine curled against me on the couch, whispering, I don't even recognize him anymore. I stroked her hair and stared into the darkness beyond the window. Richard had crossed the line from greedy to dangerous, and now the law itself would have to answer him. I promised Elaine softly, this ends in court, and this time, it won't be him holding the papers. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of place where secrets don't survive long. Elaine sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. Across the aisle, Richard strutted in with his lawyer, dressed in a suit that looked borrowed. He smirked when he saw me. but his eyes betrayed the twitch of a cornered man. When the clerk called the case, I rose. That was when Judge Harold Whitman lifted his gaze, and the gavel froze mid-air. Recognition flickered across his face before he whispered, "It's her." The room rustled with whispers, but I held my ground. The hearing began with Richard's attorney accusing me of hiding assets, manipulating my daughter, and fabricating claims about forged documents. His words spilled fast, sharp, rehearsed. I let him finish, then placed the folder Caroline had prepared on the stand. Caroline testified first, laying out the records Thomas had left, the chain of deeds proving my ownership, the careful portfolio that Richard had tried to conceal. Keller, the investigator, followed, producing evidence of Richard's gambling debts, the falsified power of attorney, and testimonies from neighbors who had seen him ransack Elaine's apartment. Richard tried to shout over it all, insisting I had framed him, but the judge's stern voice cut through. "Sit down, Mr. Cole." At last it was my turn. I stood, the courtroom lights hot on my shoulders, and spoke simply, "I am not frail. I am not confused. I am the lawful owner of these properties, and I will not be bullied into surrendering what my husband and I built together. Richard Cole forged my name, terrorized my daughter, and broke the law." Silence followed, broken only by the shuffle of papers. Judge Whitman leaned forward, his eyes steady on mine, then shifted to Richard. "The evidence is overwhelming. The settlement was violated, the documents were falsified, and threats were made. This court issues a permanent restraining order, full restitution, and recommends criminal charges." The gavel struck. Richard's face drained of color. Elaine gripped my hand, tears sliding down her cheeks. As deputies led Richard away, I felt the years of doubt and fear lift like dust shaken from a rug. Justice had spoken, not in anger, but in truth. The house was quiet the night Richard was sentenced, but the silence no longer felt heavy. Elaine moved back into her old room for a while, the one still painted pale yellow, lined with books from her childhood. She filed for divorce within a week. The papers came back signed and stamped, and for the first time in months, her shoulders eased. Each evening, I brewed chamomile tea and sat with her at the kitchen table. We spoke of her students, of lesson plans she longed to write again, of the baby she carried. The bitterness in her voice softened as weeks turned into months, replaced by cautious hope. She confessed one night, tears glistening. "I thought I'd lost you, Mom. I thought siding with him meant I couldn't come back." "You never lost me," I told her. "You just needed space to see the truth." When Clara was born that spring, she came into the world with a strong cry and tiny fists balled tight, holding her. I felt the circle of life steady itself again, roots pushing deep into soil that had nearly been stolen. With Caroline's guidance, I established the Lantern Porch Foundation in Thomas's name. We rented a modest office above the library, where volunteers answered calls from women too often ignored, widows, single mothers, grandmothers cut out of their own homes. We gave them advice, resources, and sometimes just a steady voice telling them they weren't alone. The day we cut the ribbon, Elaine stood beside me with Clara in her arms. Neighbors came, former students of Thomas's came. Even Judge Whitman stopped by quietly, shaking my hand with a look of respect that needed no words. That evening I sat on the porch as the sun lowered, violets blooming along the steps, Clara cooing softly against my shoulder. I thought of Thomas, of his letter tucked away in my desk. "Power is not for revenge," he'd written. "It is for teaching, for protecting." I had learned the truth of that. The fight had not left me bitter. It had left me whole. My daughter was safe, my granddaughter's future secure, and the house still stood, filled with the warmth of lives rebuilt. As the sky turned pink and the swing creaked gently in the breeze, I realized justice had found its way home, and so had I. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.